Star Trek Prodigy is back after a long slumber, and somehow we are still only in Season 1. That being said, spoiler contained ahead, warning issued, now it's on you. Herein lies thoughts on Episode 11 of Season 1 entitled Asylum, but as this will constitute my first Prodigy review since I started babbling on YouTube, let me give you my thoughts on this show up until now. So when I first saw this show announced, I was absolutely convinced that they were just taking characters from a Monsters vs. Aliens type of show and just repurposing them into Star Trek in order to shove some branding in there. I do have to admit that while the pilot episode may have warranted this fear, ever since that point it has become clear that this show is written purely with Star Trek in mind, even if the original plan of the show was not that. I could see the main storyline with the Diviner and Gwyn relationship, along with Dahl's quest to find out who he truly is, being plucked from another idea, but it fits so well into this universe that they've built that I'm not minding it too much. It's no secret that I love Voyager, so the fact that they are leaning heavily into that branch of Trek is also keeping me quite engaged. Don't laugh. You know I did that on purpose. Now, my main fault with Voyager, as with many others, was the unwillingness for them to make things stick for the long term. Not to turn this into a discussion about that show, but it's fantastic to see impact from those events and characters being carried through in a more serialized and connected manner. My only real gripes would have to be the animation style, which isn't my favorite, but it's something I've managed to let grow on me. And similar to Lower Decks, they've gone above and beyond, way out of their way, to make the Star Trek elements actually look and feel like Star Trek elements. And that is something that really puts high marks on this show for me. While I think the slightly watered down nature of this being a kid's show somewhat hurts the overall quality of it, it's not enough to ruin anything. But as an adult, questionably, I know, I found it a bit grating to enjoy early scenes with Dahl. He was just a bit too spastic and annoying for my taste, but it fits the mold of the show they were going for, and he's really kind of evolved over the show, and that isn't really an issue that much anymore. I never really personally believed that Star Trek needed to be something that stooped to the level of a children's program. Heck, myself and many people like me have watched it since birth. But that being said, they've done quite a wonderful job realizing the world and keeping it fresh and interesting enough for the older viewers, even though I acknowledge there are some who really can't get past the whole cartoon aspect to even try it. No shade on those people. I know animation is a whole different beast, and for some people, that's just a bridge too far. This show has also thrown out a couple of what, to me, are the best episodes in New Trek history. The Kobayashi Maru episode, while it's becoming a too-traverse Trek trope in my opinion, was an outstanding love letter to Trek history, and especially to many of the actors who we have lost. I believe the only actor who appeared as a tribute in that show who is still among us is Beverly Crusher, played by Gates McFadden. Nichelle Nichols was still alive at that point, but she has since left us, sadly, so it was a great tribute at the time, and it means even more now. Time Amok was also a very classic sci-fi and Star Trek trope type episode that really to me stood out as a combination of the Voyager episode Shattered, along with the Voyager episode 1, and the Stargate SG-1 finale episode. Let me explain a little bit. The episode revolves around our pretty untrained crew being trapped in a ship that was broken into different time zones, and the only character that could move freely among them, for a while at least, was hologram Janeway. It resolved in a pretty damn great way in my opinion. The skittish young girl character Roktak, who always dreamt of being an engineer, was trapped in the slowest zone of time. Eventually the Janeway program went offline and she was trapped there alone, tasked with the mission of learning engineering in order to rebuild a very critical item to fix the ship and get out of the mess. If she was unable to accomplish this, everyone would have died. So she did what she needed to do, and she solved that problem. It's unknown how long she was actually trapped in this slow period of time. According to Janeway, it was far too long. And since this was right before we ended up having the mid-season finale, we really haven't had much time to explore and experience the changes she had while in that time zone, and I'm very interested to see how this impacts her character down the road. But now back to the episode in earnest. The slow drip of Voyager reveals have been great, and now we seem to be back in the general vicinity of the Federation. The Protostar, which is the ship they're on, was originally launched with Chakotay before being lost, and we're still working on that mystery, and that fascinates me right now. We're also now dealing with 2 Janeways, the real-life version, and the hologram advisor we have followed since the start of this show. The Protostar has also become a living, that's the wrong word, I guess, a booby-trapped weapon against what I would assume is Starfleet and Federation technology, but possibly just any tech that integrates with it. And our crew of misfits came across the furthest Starfleet outpost where they meet the only occupant of the place, which is a Denobulan, and that's great. I believe it's the first time we've seen a Denobulan actually do anything in quite a while. And I actually find that great. They didn't just slap on some Dr. Flock's characteristics. They gave him his own personality. They gave him his own traits, his own characteristics. And that is wonderful. They didn't just give a carbon copy of a Flock's type character, which, let's be honest, I feel like that's probably how they would have treated it in Lower Decks. Not saying that's a bad show, but I like the fact that they just used this character as his own person. They were scanned into the system where many of the characters actually learn something about themselves for the first time. Jankum discovers that he is a Tellarite. That's interesting. We also discover what Murph is. The part that's adding some extra interest to me is Dahl's scan, because this leads to a contact Starfleet immediately warning alert. And that reminds me a bit of the Omega Directive from Star Trek Voyager. I wonder if there might be some sort of connection between himself and the Omega particle, or if this is just a separate instance of Starfleet programming a emergency code into their programs. I don't know. I think we need to see a little more of Omega in Star Trek because it has such wide-reaching implications. To only have been brought up that one time seems a bit of a missed opportunity. Now, you know I hate all these galactic ending events in Trek, so I'm glad we don't have to deal with it often. And personally, I thought that was going to be the big bad behind the burn in Discovery, but no, that turned out to be a crying alien. So who am I to say how they're going to treat this in the future? Anywho, real Janeway is on the trail of our crew, but back at the original location where the trapped Protostar was originally lost, and she discovers the body of the diviner in stasis. I never believed he was out of the show for very long, but I didn't expect him to come back to it this soon. I am very much intrigued to see how he interacts with a Starfleet crew, especially Janeway. In the show so far, he has really kind of always been the one in power, the one in charge. To see him sort of imprisoned and questioned by Janeway and to interact with Starfleet officers, that's going to be fairly interesting, and I can't wait to see that. We also get a couple of very neat flashbacks to Chakotay leaving on the trip originally, and I can't get enough of this. I always liked Chakotay, even though he was never given anything to do of import in Voyager, and by season 3 or 4, he was just kind of there. Although, like I already referenced the episode Shattered, that was a Chakotay story, and that might be one of my favorite Voyager episodes for my own personal reasons. I don't know how many people like that, but it was great. Unfortunately for our team, the dastardly virus turns the station on itself, and the Denobulan just nopes the hell out of there, thinking that our characters were saboteurs and traitors, taking the only escape pod. Terrible design choice. No idea why anyone in Starfleet would only put one escape pod in this place, even if it was only ever intended to have a crew complement of 1. What if something went wrong? Just saying. I can't believe any of the self-respecting engineers we know would have signed off on that, so this guy needs a transfer at the very least. Our crew, they have only one choice to get off the ship, and that's to put on some EV suits and to get out of Dodge that way. I mean, this is supposed to be a cheap kids cartoon, right? Absolutely not. Think about everything I just said, and it could be applied to almost any Star Trek show, and it would be fantastic. I just keep growing more amazed at how much this show seems to be doing right when we have so many Trek shows being churned out right now that are failing and falling flat in so many different ways. I suppose the lack of strict oversight just might be what this show needed to become free to act upon the whims of the team working upon it, and if that's the case, I am quite impressed. Perhaps this isn't the greatest Star Trek ever created, but it's absolutely a breath of fresh air that seems to truly contain at least a piece of the soul of classic Trek. And I am very much engaged, did it again, and looking forward to the rest of the season. But what do you think? Are you able to find joy in Prodigy, or is the animated game and slightly more child-oriented nature just too much for you? I don't really have much feedback to go on, so I would love to hear all about your takes on Prodigy, and leave all that below. While you're down there, roundhouse kick the like button on your way to the subscribe button, and until next time, computer, end program.